we would think Indians born in the US become more American than Indian. But I met this strategist recently who made me proud. He reads and writes Bengali and will make you laugh with his wit. Toby, welcome to WomenNow. Such a pleasure and honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
So, Bengali, White House, politics, how did it all happen? And explain.
Well, politics is in a Bengali person's blood. I grew up in a household where we talked about politics all the time. It was our adda, right? We got together with friends and family and always kind of talked about what's going on in current events. And this is something that I think we've seen within our community in the last 10 years especially. You know, our community has seen their wages go down. They've seen poverty go up. They've seen retirement security go down. The conversations that our community is having every weekend has changed. Now there's a bigger sense about how can we use politics to solve our everyday problems. And that's the kind of energy that really inspired me to get involved in.
How did you get started?
Started working on political campaigns, and one thing led to the next, and I found myself as a deputy press secretary to Al Gore's presidential campaign. Worked in the Clinton administration. So I got very involved very quickly, and it wasn't through personal connections or family contributions to political campaigns. It was because I had a real interest and got involved. But more than anything else, I think what drives me in politics is this idea that, in general, South Asians, Indian Americans haven't been very involved in politics here. But there are real issues that we confront that could be solved by our collective effort in this space, and it's that kind of energy that it's really.
That's probably because Indians feel that either you have to be a doctor or an engineer. They're the mainstream careers. Politics is not considered as one of them. How would you motivate or inspire our viewers to get involved, get into politics, and the change that they can be a part of?
You know, it's very interesting. You know, we do have a lot of doctors and engineers, and my father was an engineer. He was a jet rocket engineer, and I was one of his computer babies. But let's look at our community as it stands right now and all the issues that we're facing. For every if you look at it, one in about every 100 or every 10 Indian American households have a doctor. But if you really look at it, 1 in 5 households have no health insurance. So when we start to look at it, there are real problems that we're facing. I mean, we have a population that's aging. And so there's this elder generation that has had children in this country, the folks who've immigrated in the 70s. And now it's my generation that's starting to confront, well, what are we going to do to keep this pact with our parents? How are we going to deal with retirement? How are we going to deal with end-of-life health care? As young professionals, since there's so many of us, we're dealing with how we're going to raise our children and provide education for them. We're trying to figure out how we're going to create families in an economy that's downward facing. These are real important issues that we need to solve, and we need to do it our way. I mean, I'm obviously a Democrat. But, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they have their own thoughts about how these things should be confronted. But as Indian Americans, as South Asians, we need to figure out how we solve our problems and how we use the system to do that.
What would your message be to all other American-born confident Desis as to how to bridge this difference of culture between their household, where we're trying to grow our kids in the most Indian way, and the mainstream?
Well, it's also a very funny thing here, right? I mean, my parents, it's actually very interesting. My father came to this country first in 1961. This was a time when non-white people didn't have the right to vote in America. And he never really talked about this much, but I met one of his college classmates when I was in Delhi. One of his university classmates, when he first come to this country, lived in Florida, and he told me a story of how all of him and his Indian friends actually all went to a restaurant to try to have dinner, and they weren't allowed to go to that restaurant because they weren't white. So I asked my father about this, and I asked him, what did you do about this? And he started to get pretty upset about it. And he finally told me that their response was they called the police. Well, the laws of the land actually didn't allow them to go to this restaurant. So the world has changed a lot since they've come here. And I bring this up because not only has America changed, but Indian culture has also changed. So a lot of my peers who have been born and raised here grow up kind of learning a antiquated culture that's been frozen in time. You know, I go to India a lot. I also go to Pakistan and Bangladesh. I do a lot of work in the region. And the culture, my peers who are living there are much more modernized in many different ways than we are here, even though...
Yeah, there's absolutely a culture shock when I go back. I mean, where was I?
I'll tell you the story. I was at IIT Delhi for a couple of semesters when I was in college. I did a fellowship there. And my first day of class, I decided, I'm going to wear kurta pajama. I'm going to totally do this up. I go to class, and everyone was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I was the only one dressed like a freedom fighter, I suppose. But at the end of the day, culture is something that lives and breathes, and it defines us in the collectiveness of how we embrace it. And frankly, I think there are a lot of. I think we're going to see this play out over time. There's always going to be a tension between the generations about what is acceptable or not. And for those of us who are not doctors or engineers, those of us who are working in the media or working in politics, we're setting new grounds and we're carrying the torch forward. I mean, this is a very exciting, I think this is actually an extraordinary time in American politics. I mean, the changes that we've seen, President Obama, the first black president.
And the kind of initiatives is...
Well, he's clearly moving a lot of new and different things, but just the very fact that this man is our president should be inspiration to anyone who doesn't fit the sort of 1950s mainstream American profile. And I think it's actually inspiring a lot of our generation of Indian Americans.
Well, you speak Bengali.
Yes.
Likhte
padi, podte padi, kobita bolte padi.
Who was most responsible for that?
When I was young, my parents exposed me to a lot of Bengali Sanskrit. We not only went to
and you don't even have an accent, come on.
We actually had a Bangla school. So every Sunday, a group of about 30 of us got together and learned how to read and write and learned Bengali grammar, the equivalent of which I don't even know in English. They took it very seriously. Now, I think it was actually a pretty intelligent strategy to make sure that the young Bengali boys and young Bengali girls got to know each other well for later in life. But it was terrific.
Knowing the language, knowing how to read and write, do you think it better connects you to the roots?
I think it's easier to impress uncles and aunties, especially if you can make them laugh. But I think culture is much deeper than just language. I mean, I think the language makes it easier to connect with people, right? And what is language? It's a way to communicate. It's how we share ideas and thoughts and solve our problems. So I think being able to communicate is very important.
And knowing your language back from India, I think it makes you more confident when you go out and in groups. You have to deal with people who are talking in that language, and if you didn't know anything about that, you feel kind of lost.
Forget about it. That's exactly right.
So yeah, the next generation, I'm sure, should be encouraged to learn the language that their parents are used to talking.
Well, and not only just because it's what their parents are learning, but think about this, right? I mean, Hindi and Bengali and many of these languages are among the most widely spoken languages in the world, right? So if the world is becoming more global, these are important languages to know.
Well, thank you so much, Toby. This was great talking to you. I'm sure you've inspired a lot of our viewers to join politics and many other areas that they did not consider as mainstream.
I hope so.